talk just a little bit about permanence, and permanence is a very important thing. This is what we ultimately want to achieve for every child, is that sense of permanence. Now, this is typically filled by a biological parent, or other caring parents like grandparents or, excuse me, that primary attachment figure is really, really important. We've talked about that when we talk about the attachment cycle and things like that. And we're trying to get a child back to that state of permanence so they can build that relationship or enhance that relationship as much as possible. So as a volunteer advocate, you are going to want to advocate for a safe, permanent home as quickly as possible for that child or those children, but that honors the child's sense of culture and sense of time. Now, there are 4 possible permanency options within the state of Kansas. And the very first one is one we've been talking about all along, and that is reintegration. When that child or children are put back into the home, the family stays how it is with extra resources, etc., to overcome the challenges that they face that were at the start of the child in need of care case in the beginning. So return to parent is definitely one of them. There's also adoption. This is potentially where your parents' rights have been severed, or we've had children where both parents are deceased, and so adoption is pretty much one of their only options at that point in time. And this adoption can be by a relative or a non-relative. Now, that's one we're all pretty familiar with, so I don't want to spend too much time on it. Another one is kinship guardianship, and that is a permanent guardianship, a permanent custodianship here within the state of Kansas. It is typically not one that you hear of very often, and I know you only see 3 there. We're going to hit the 4th one, I promise you. But let's go back into what is kinship guardianship. This is subsidized, which means that there are some benefits. It's an alternative to adoption for children or youth who have been placed with relatives, especially it's that, or related or non-related kin. These have to be certified foster parents. That relative or non-relative has to be certified, and the placement has to last 6 months or longer for kinship guardianship to be an option. So the other one is kinship non-related. This is guardianship by individuals while not, remember, they might not be biologically related, but they have had a significant impact throughout that child or children's lives. So that's important. The other one that we'll have is a long-term foster care, and unfortunately this is the one that wasn't on the one before, on the slide before, but it is basically aging out of the system. They stay in foster care, and let me say that as much as, there are a lot of wonderful things about the state of Kansas, no state or no commonwealth does a better job than actual families. And so therefore we don't really want children to have to age out of foster care, which we call APLA, another permanent planned living arrangement, where they age out of the system. That is not our ideal. That is not what we want to go for ever. But this is basically long-term foster care. This often becomes the plan for older children or children who are difficult or unadoptable. Children at the age of 16 can also determine whether they want to be adopted or not, and whether they just want to age out. They might be done. They might be just done with the whole process. And so that is an option that they have. Children do have a choice at a certain age whether or not they wish to be adopted. This is one of the reasons why it wasn't on the first slide, is it is not really considered a solution, a sense of permanency. It is unfortunately one of the 4 permanency options. But we really want permanency, and ideally with some sort of family unit. So those are the 4 permanency options within the state of Kansas currently. There is talk of another one, but we will get to that later once it becomes official. Not in this training, it'll probably be in our next version of the training. So one of the things that you can do, although I was in court very, very recently within the last couple of weeks, and they said you can't do this in certain circumstances, but you can do concurrent planning. Some agencies, some contract agencies like St. Francis, like to limit these concurrent planning options. However, the court does not have to by statute. The court can do a concurrent planning, and that means you're going to work two of those permanency solutions at the same time. So one might be reintegrate the child at home, and another might be adoption, potential kinship placement, adoption, and things like that. And there is a possibility. So what I will tell you is currently the policies and procedures of our current contract agency of St. Francis say that they cannot do a concurrent plan of reintegration and aging out at the same time. That is actually not the case by statute. That is their particular policy. The state of Kansas does allow you to have concurrent plans, which means you're working two different plans at the same time. And one is you're trying to reintegrate, but if it doesn't happen in time, that you're also preparing for that child to age out of the system. We've had cases here where the child didn't come into care until they were 16 or 17, especially if they're 17, they're going to technically age out at 18, and the case is probably going to still be going on. They have to prepare for both options at the same time, and that's what we mean by concurrent planning. It does enable a case to move through the system with more quickly. If we are trying to work reintegration and we don't think reintegration is going to work, maybe the parents aren't participating at all, but we have a relative, the child is placed in kinship placement with a relative, and that relative says, well, we'll take them. They might start to put things together. Okay, here's all the documentation that you're going to need if the parents' rights are terminated and we have to do adoption. The parents also have the option of signing, voluntarily relinquishing and signing the child over to this relative in that kind of permanent custodianship, permanent guardianship type of arrangement. So those things can be happening at the same time that we're working reintegration, and it's just a matter of we're in position to move very quickly from one to another. We want all the options to be very family-centered with parents involved in the decision-making from the front. And then I want you as a volunteer advocate to be aware of all the options so that you can have those discussions and be able to help families understand that there's more than one solution sometimes, or what they might mean by concurrent planning. Although we always want them to go to their lawyers or the social workers, we do want to facilitate information that there are other options that they could consider, and that this is, you should talk to your social worker for more details, or you should talk to your attorney for more details on this. But we do not do concurrent planning very often. It is typically something that we do under very certain circumstances. If the CASA staff member ever asks you if you've considered it, obviously you may or may not have. I have brought up an alternate permanency option to one of my volunteers before, and they were like, well, I've forgotten about that since training because I haven't had to deal with it. And so then I was able to explain really briefly what it was, and we could put it on the table as an option. Whether it's taken or not, it's at least an option. And a lot of times, since we're trying to honor that child's sense of time, in certain circumstances, especially with the older children that come in and like they're almost 17, they might be 16 but about to turn 17, and we just, based on the complexity of the case, we think that they may age out before they're able to reintegrate. We can still work both of those options, and we want to make sure that we are available to do so. Okay, one of the other things for children is educational advocacy. So what I will tell you is this is a little different. This is someone who absolutely is liaisoning with the school or the educational facility and the child or the child's placement. A lot of times it could be the child's placement if it's a foster parent or someone else. This is someone who could really help. We find educational advocates used or recommended, and you can recommend an educational advocate for your CASA child. when they are in high school and getting close to graduation, and they may have bounced placement, so we need someone to really help them navigate, like, what do I need for credits, and how can we make this happen, and things like that. They might need someone to advocate for them educationally to help them graduate on time. And so that might be one of those circumstances. Also, children with really intense educational needs, they have that individualized education plan, that IEP, but it might be a very complicated one, and they might need the parent or the placement or whomever may need more help navigating that educational process to get the child on the right track. Those are also times when you might want to recommend an educational advocate. Now, one of the things, and you can read the slide there, I'm not going to go over, it wants you to consider how this might be helpful in an older youth, in a middle age, or a younger youth, preventing problems. I'm kind of going through some of those answers here with you right now. What I can tell you is I do have CASA volunteers in my program that have gone on and gotten the separate training to become an educational advocate. However, you cannot be an educational advocate and a CASA advocate for the same child or sibling group. You have to be one or the other. There is sometimes a conflict of interest in what is best for them educationally versus what is in their overall best interest, and you as the CASA volunteer advocate always have to advocate for their best overall interest. And so while I do not preclude volunteers from becoming educational advocates, we do have a system in place here where they are precluded from becoming an educational advocate for the child or the sibling group that they serve as an as a CASA advocate. So how is advocating for older youth a little bit different? I don't want you to pay attention to Maria Amarillo as much as I want to look at. You need to make consideration of their education. We're talking about graduation. We're talking about possibly college. Some children graduate from high school at a very young 17 because they might have started school early, might have skipped a grade. There are a lot of variety of reasons. And so then they can even start at a college or a community college before they're actually aged out of the system. Their housing or living situation, we want to make sure that they have the independent living skills, which is going to talk about like finances and different things like that, which you see on here as well. And there's a lot of things that credit checks and understanding how to get a credit checks and what's your credit score mean. And I know I'm talking about a lot of financial, but those are things that we need to consider. We're preparing them to become adults. And I will tell you, they need to know how to make a medical appointment. They need to understand what medical insurance is and how it works, how to have a bank account, how to find a job and employment and what that looks like, and taxes and how you file your taxes and different things like that. How they can move from mental health and therapies that have been provided for them while they're system, and then how are they transitioning when they are older and they may need to do it more on their own, if they're aging out, if they're not aging out. There's so many things that we need to think about when we're advocating for an older youth, that we've got time to have that child achieve permanency when they're younger. We don't always have time with the older youth, so it's a little bit more intensive. There's more for you to consider in advocating for them. Okay. Now, I have mentioned this before, and I will mention it again now. One of the disproportional groups that we do have in the child welfare system here is there is a higher disproportionate number of LGBTQ youth that are in the foster care system than is in the population at large. And so we want to make sure that when you have a youth that is LGBTQ, that we're showing they're very professional, we want to be appropriate, we want to work all of those cultural competency skills and be very aware, because they're going to face unique challenges, and so we want to be aware of that and advocate well for those children. And we have a video that is going to help with that, and so I'm going to invite you to watch the video.